if you can get a more efficient way to make delicious meat, you free up all the land and resources to achieve other things. And that enables you to come up with better systems better solutions throughout the rest of the food system. There are almost no technologies that are key to human life that have not significantly changed since the Stone Age. We see ourselves as being a technology company learning how to make food more efficiently from the raw materials that farmers produce. How do we make something that has the same excitement of eating, of cooking and eating as you get from the cow-derived version? So the question we're asking really is, can we come up with a better way to make delicious foods without using that technology?
Ryan Muncie is probably the smartest guy I know.
Trust me, Muncie is the nutrition guy.
Ryan Muncie's out there trying to make the world better for all of us.
The Optimal Performance Podcast is bold, edgy, creative, entertaining, and epic.
Ryan Muncie is my go-to guy.
Ryan Muncie he's the first guy I call.
He's making people's lives better. Ryan Muncie's an innovator.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Optimal Performance Podcast. The OPP, as you know, is brought to you by Natural Stacks, makers of 100% natural and open source supplements designed to help you live optimal. For more information on how to build optimal mental and physical performance into your life, keep it right here, listening to the OPP, or go to naturalstacks.com. All right, so I want to welcome you to a really cool episode, hope, of the Optimal Performance Podcast. So there have been a lot of press lately about a company called Impossible Foods and their lab-grown meat or pseudo-burger, fake meat, faux burger, whatever you want to call it. I reached out to them and am very grateful for Chris Davis coming on the show. Chris is the Director of Research and Development at Impossible Foods. So in this intro, I really want to reiterate, Chris, thank you for coming on the show. Rosie, thank you for helping set it up. I'm grateful for you guys being open to come on the show, especially knowing our background in previous episodes, that we don't exactly favor GMOs. My allegiance is to you, the listener. So I want to reiterate, I think that this is an important discussion for all of us to have. We know that the factory farming model is broken. We know that we need to affect change on a global level. And Chris made a great comment in this episode, that even he and they at Impossible Foods see Impossible Meats as part of, not necessarily the whole or the entire solution. The product that they're making, they see it as, one way that people can, choose, if it's right for them, to be a part of, progress and moving forward. I also love that we agree wholeheartedly on the need to reduce food waste. You'll hear some numbers in the podcast. I will link in the show notes to some of the data on exact amounts of food waste. There's actually a really funny and great segment from the John Oliver show. I will put that video on the show notes as well for you guys. I think now's as good a time as any to remind you, go to naturalstacks.com. You'll be able to see the show notes, links, resources, video version of this podcast on naturalstacks.com. At the top of the website, just go to articles and you'll be able to find this blog post for this podcast there. Now, all that being said, again, my allegiance is to you, the listener, the OPP folks. And, I think Chris and I sort of disagree on the purist-pragmatist spectrum when it comes to the contents and the production of Impossible Meats, as well as, sort of the stewardship of the land and the leadership role in this conversation. You'll hear some of that in the show. And again, Chris, I thank you for coming on the show. And I think it remains to be seen how he and Impossible Foods choose to handle that going forward. For me personally, if you guys, the listener, are looking to me for a recommendation, this product is not something that I'm going to eat. I want to make that clear that it's not something that I'm recommending for your diet. If it's something that you want to be a part of and want to incorporate in your diet, then by all means, go for it. I think it's great that Chris and Impossible Foods are looking into a potential solution and trying to be part of the conversation, be part of the solution going forward. But as you'll hear in my line of questioning, I think that they are, I think there are still some areas where, there's work to be done. And I'd like to, challenge them to try to shore that up and, contribute fully and not just in terms of producing a product that generates revenue and generates profit, specifically in terms of the factory farming that is still being done for the conventional commodity production of their ingredients, as well as in the beginning of the conversation we talk about the need to get meat into parts of the world that don't have cold transportation. But then once we start talking about their product, we find out that it is a raw meat that requires cold transportation, and their focus is on delivering it to, places in the U.S. where, there's the ability to be compensated for that, as opposed to, trying to make a product that can be distributed and gotten into places that have issues with meat consumption now. So I'll let you guys listen to that. Love to hear your feedback on this one, and as always, go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If we read your review on the show, we will hook you up with free Natural Stacks products. I want to read a review right now from TYSIP. This was on iTunes. Favorite optimizer information. My favorite go-to podcast. That means a lot. Thank you so much, TYSIP. Ryan Muncie always touches on subjects that are relatable to life in general. As a father of 2 young kids, it's always helpful to learn how to be a better version of myself. So thank you, TYSIP. Shoot me an email, ryan@naturalstacks.com. We'll get you some goodies as a thank you for your support. And for all you guys listening, I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of your life, be a part of your journey, and help you find more ways to optimize yourself and grow and evolve. That's what I'm here to do as well. And finally, share the OPP. There's people in your life who will benefit from the things that we're talking about. Enjoy this stuff. Share it with them, whether it's an episode in specific or, the podcast itself is a general thing. Get more people listening to this thing, get more people subscribed. That's how we help more and grow this movement. So thank you guys for being a part of this. And here's Chris. Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
My pleasure. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So right before we hit record, you said something that was so beautiful. And I think it hits the essence of what I want to capture with this episode of the OPP. And, paraphrasing, feel free to repeat this in your words if you want to. But, the concept of using science to figure out how we feed the world going forward is a complex, complicated issue that, we don't have all the answers to, but we're looking into it. Folks like yourself are doing a lot of research and trying to ask and answer those questions.
I think that's a fair statement. It's over the last 8,000 years that we've been doing farming. We've constantly increased the productivity of the land, the number of people we can feed using, and this is a continuation of that process. But every time you bring in new ways of doing things, there are questions you need to ask and answer about whether or not it's a good choice. Yeah,
and I think one of the topics that I wanted to cover with you is the topic of farming. I think all of our listeners, and you would probably agree with this, that the modern factory farming system that we have now is broken. There are numerous flaws in terms of the quality of food that it produces and the impact that it has on the environment. Do you see what you guys are doing at Impossible Foods as one kind of one tine or one prong in a multi-prong approach to solving that?
I think I would start by saying that I think if you just look at the number of people who get fed nowadays and the number of calories they're consuming, and just look at the things like metrics of health, like the height of people in Asia and how much they've increased over the last 40 years and so, the farming industry is doing a miraculous job of feeding people. And over the last 40 years, there's been a huge increase in the number of calories and the quality of food provided to people. So we should not downplay that. I mean, there's been a huge benefit from farming practices over the last few years. Now, that when you talk about the intensification of farming, about the factory farms, about the fact that they are, because they're so intensive, that they have consequences on the environment. It causes increased runoff of fertilizers, etc., into the water. There's clearly some issues we need to do better at. So I think when I think of what we're doing explicitly in Impossible Foods, I think the key for us is to think that when you think about animal farming specifically, animals are, the way we treat them in the modern food ecosystem, we are treating them as a technology to transform biomass, corn, studies, distillers, dry grains, soy, etc., some grass, some hay, etc., alfalfa. Turn that stuff, which has all the nutrients, but is in a form factor we don't particularly want to eat. Their job then is to turn that into something delicious. We then harvest that deliciousness and we use that as a key part of our food system. And that's fine. The only problem is that in terms of the amount of goodness that goes into a cow versus goes into the consumer's plate, it's just really inefficient. I think it's about 3% of the protein we feed to a cow ends up being consumed by humans. About the same ratio for just overall energy intakes. Hugely less than 3% in terms of water. And so just the inefficiency of that technological process of turning the proteins, fats, and sugars present in the crops produced by the farmers into meat that is in a delicious form we want to take is really the cause of a lot of these environmental issues associated with intensive factory farming. So the question we're asking really is, can we come up with a better way to make delicious foods without using that technology, which is fundamentally, if you think without using that technology, and I think the way I tend to think about that is that there are almost no technologies that are key to human life that have not significantly changed since the Stone Age. In the Stone Age, basically, we actually went and hunted the cow rather than farming it. But farming cows started 3,000-4,000 BC. Mm-hmm. Since that, but ever since then, the basic point has been take plant biomass, feed it to cow, eat the cow. Is the basic technology paradigm, and that has not changed in that entire time frame. There's been no application. So that's really where we're seeing an opportunity here.
Right. Well, and just to put some numbers to what you're saying about the inefficiency of, especially the factory farming model, it takes over 900 gallons of water to produce a single pound of cheese. It takes 660 gallons of water for a quarter pound hamburger to get to your table. The domestic use for water is 5% compared to 55% for agriculture. So when we look at like environmental changes, things like taking shorter showers, recycling, other waste-saving ideas would combine to save us 47 gallons a day, and that's less than a tenth of the 660 gallons required for a quarter pound hamburger on your plate. Right. Those are numbers from the documentary Cowspiracy. Right. And for you guys listening, I've got a response to that that we'll post in the show notes. You guys can read that blog. But I feel like in that documentary, they overlooked the idea or the potential solution of moving from a factory farming model to a permaculture, grass-fed, regenerative farming model. So for me, I think that on the farming side, that is a solution. We know that doing that can provide the amount of food required to feed the world, and we'll get to what you guys are talking about with Impossible Foods as another solution to provide a different food. But just to stick with that idea for just a minute, we know that we don't have a production problem. We produce enough food already to feed the world. What we have is a distribution problem. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can't say that I'm an expert on the distribution problems in Africa, but it is very clear that, for example, if we're talking about products like meat and food, they need to be refrigerated in order to be transferred for any length of time. And so that requires a cold chain. In the West, we have a good system for refrigerated trucks, refrigerated warehouses, freezer warehouses for transporting food like meat, like vegetables, long distances, and they'll last. In Africa and China and India, those food chains don't exist, and it will take billions probably of investment to build those refrigerated warehouses and refrigerated trucks. And until those are developed, it will mean that this distribution problem will continue to happen. To some extent, I would challenge we do make enough food for everybody, but not necessarily in form factors that people want. There's plenty of protein and fat and things in the presence in the soy, in the corn, etc. But in terms of meat, which is the form factor people want to eat, it doesn't look like the projections indicate that we'll need to produce 50% to 70% more meat over the next 40 years in order to meet the increasing demand coming from Asia, from Africa. Because as people get rich, the first thing you do when you get rich is to eat like rich people, which is the American diet. We're talking about eating meat. And so whilst there is plenty of intrinsic calories and protein out there, it's not obvious that there's enough capability to produce delicious meat products that people want.
Okay, so let's talk about lab meats. What constitutes a lab meat, and how do you guys go about creating the Impossible Foods burger that, like you said, is in the form that people want to eat?
So there's a couple of different streams of this particular approach. I mean, historically, there's been the fake meats made, but in Chinese restaurants have been around for a long, long time. And there's been this continuing approach to try and make better meat analogs.
What are those made out of?
Typically, they're soy and wheat. And they're pretty good. But
that's TVP, right? Like texturized vegetable proteins.
That's one of the approaches you can do it with.
Okay.
But what we found is that people don't choose to eat those. When people go to the barbecue, there's a certain set of people who will say, I will willing to sacrifice and to eat a vegetarian option versus having a delicious burger. But most people don't choose to make that sacrifice. So the question is, how do we make a product that's delicious enough that people say that I want to eat that. I don't want to eat the piece of cow. I want to eat this because it's more delicious. Mm-hmm. So that's really the touchstone. So for any form of successful replacement for meat on the marketplace, it will need to be equivalently delicious to meat. And so that's really what we've been focusing on, is how do we replicate the theater of cooking meat? So when it's soft, it hits the grill, it's got to sizzle, it's got to change color, it's got to smoke, all the flavors that come off, because a lot of that is what really drives the thrill of eating a burger, eating meat. If we can replace that, then it becomes not a sacrifice to eat this new form of product. So that was the challenge. And technically, the solution we've ended up really was, a traditional engineering approach of reverse engineering meat and saying, why is meat so darn tasty? What is it about it that works so well? And a lot of it is, what is this theater of the creating meat? And so we've done a lot of work to basically figure that out, and looking at the basic science of how you create the flavor. And one of the things we really learned was that there's the basic chemistry that enables meat to go from a relatively mild flavor in something like a tartare through to the rich, complex flavors of a cooked burger is flavor chemistry that's catalyzed during the presence of cooking, while you're cooking the burger. And what we've done is basically say, okay, this is how it works. And then we've discovered that we can replicate that by using materials from plants. And that it constitutes a mixture of simple nutrients like sugars, amino acids, nucleotides, vitamins, and a heme protein. And the heme protein is basically what drives the flavor chemistry. It makes the difference between a vegetable broth and a beef broth in terms of the flavor chemistry. And the same is true inside the animal. And it's also exactly the same flavor chemistry that happens inside beef. In beef, the protein is called myoglobin. It is what makes beef red and changes color when it cooks. And we found a plant protein that does exactly the same job, actually in soy root nodules. And that does exactly the same chemistry as happens in the cow-derived meat. And so therefore we get the same flavor profiles. And so because we're replicating all the natural transitions associated with meat, with the cow-derived version, we get the same properties, we get the same excitement. And that's really our challenge, is how to, as I say, how do we make something that has the same excitement of eating, of cooking and eating, as you get from the cow-derived version.
And you said the myoglobin, and I think what I've read from some other reports that I've seen about Impossible Foods online is that you guys are using some sort of a genetically engineered heme compound to produce a hemoglobin element to the burger.
So actually, it's the protein itself is identical to what's found in nature. It turns out that every organism basically has to control oxygen inside its cells. And so it does that using this as protein of this type. Soy root nodules are particularly rich in this protein, in a protein analog. And for those who don't know, the root nodule of soy is the piece of the soybean that fixes nitrogen in the soil. So it takes the gaseous nitrogen from the atmosphere, fixes it as ammonia, which is why soybeans make a richer soil as they grow and do their work, because they're leguminous. So this protein is hugely abundant inside the root nodules of soy, and there's more than enough there to replace all the heme protein you could ever need for meat. The problem is that it's all underground. And so when we first started, we were going to isolate the material directly from that material. But then we did the analysis and we realized that in order to access it, we would have to dig up all the soy plants, disrupt all the soil, and fundamentally bring a whole lot of carbon into the atmosphere and disrupt a lot of soil ecosystems just to get access to this particular protein. And so we said, well, doesn't seem like a very good solution. So why not, is there a better way to make that same protein? And then we realized that we could make that same protein in a yeast. And so what we've done is basically we've created a yeast and then we grow it in a very similar way to the way you make beer. But using that same technology that you use to make beer, we can now make that protein and isolate it and put it into our food with much less environmental sustainability issues than if we were to take it directly from the natural source. So we made a conscious choice that it was a better solution to make this protein by fermentation than it would be to take it from the underground natural source. But the protein itself is actually nature identical. It's exactly the same material, just from a different source.
So how long does it take to create one burger, or enough meat to make one burger?
Well, that's really a function of factory size. So right now we're scaling up production. We're in 36 restaurants, I think, right now. They keep adding, so it's hard to keep track. But as of probably next month, we're thinking, certainly by the end of this year, we will have the ability to make about £1 million a month of meat. And that should enable us to reach restaurants pretty much across the US.
Is the plan to stay in restaurants or to move to grocery stores as well?
I think that's a timing issue. It turns out that about half of the US ground beef is sold in restaurants and about half is sold at home through retail. So, and I think the global market's for it's enormous. So we don't need to go to retail anytime soon, but at some point it will make a good choice, and that's a marketing decision that's not mine.
Right. Yeah, I think I remember reading that the meat industry globally is like $807 billion, and that was from 2013 or 2015. But
right, it's big.
Well, so when we're talking earlier about distribution of food around the world, and we're talking about not having cold storage, cold transportation in places like Africa or Asia, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the problem that you guys are trying to solve, how do you get the Impossible Burger or the Impossible Foods burger? What does it have a specific name?
So we tend to call it the impossible meat, and then when it's cooked into a burger format, it's called the Impossible Burger. But if the chef makes a meatball, it's an Impossible Meatball. If they make taco, presumably be an Impossible Taco.
So the Impossible Meat, how do you guys envision getting that to the places in the world that don't have cold transportation for actual meat from biomass?
So right now, the good thing is our product, because it has the same raw meat, it's essentially raw meat. It has exactly the same transportation challenges, and so basically we just loop into the normal meat supply chain. So in the US, that works just fine. When we start talking about the cold chain in the third world, that's something that I think is currently outside of our scope. Once we make enough material and generate market share and income, then we'll start having enough bandwidth to address some of those issues about how to get them to the marketplace. But at least initially, we're focusing on the US. And the main reason for that is, one, it's the market we know best because we're based in the US. And secondarily, if you think about this problem about how to change people's perception of what constitutes success and in their diet, a lot of people will tend to follow what the US eats. And so, because people like to follow that successful metric. So, but by making the case in the US that the Impossible Burger, Impossible Meat, and this plant-derived meat is actually the aspirational product, so that it's the best meat you could ever get, is this material rather than via a cow, it will then tend to drive people's behavior patterns to look for the best opportunity rather than what's available. And so it's staying in the US and becoming a key part of the US food ecosystem is going to be important to feeding the world. So we will need to go to those places.
So just to be clear, the Impossible Meat product does require refrigeration before cooking?
Yes. I mean, it's a raw meat. It will spoil exactly the same way that the cow-derived material will. We have some advantages in terms of the fact that our factories can be cleaner, but the intrinsic risk associated with raw food is identical.
Okay, so we know some of the components of the burger are, you explained how some of it was sort of prepared or produced similar to beer with the yeast formation. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other ingredients? How are they farmed and produced?
So the other ingredients are all standard commodity products that are found in regular chef's kitchens. So we did a lot. It was one of those interesting journeys where we spent a lot of time deep in the weeds of the science. And then as we started to move towards market, it became more and more simple as a product. So the protein fraction of the burger, which is about 27% of the mass of the burger, is composed of wheat protein, potato protein, and some soy protein. The fat component right now is coconut oil, and then the rest, most of the rest is water. But there are some other small ingredients like some vitamins, sugars, amino acids. There's a couple of carbohydrates present to increase the handling capabilities and make it stick together properly, because there's nothing worse than a raw burger's got to hold together. So you've got to form it into a burger or into a meatball or what have you. So we need a few carbohydrates to stick it together and to improve the raw handling of the material. But that's essentially it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned those are mostly commodity type items. I mean, the potato, wheat, soy, are those all conventionally farmed?
They are at present. There's no reason we couldn't do it using the organic chain, but at present, I don't think that is something we've chosen to do.
I mean, it seems to me that still falls under the, fueling the factory farming system that we're trying to get away from.
Well, I'm not. I think intensive farming is going to be required to feed 9 to 10 billion people in 20 years' time. The question is, what's an efficient way to achieve that? So when people talk about factory farming, typically they're talking about the animal piece of it. And we're sidestepping that completely by going directly from the field of plants, the field full of plants, directly to meat. So there is no factory farm there. We will be doing intensive farming to make those commodity crops, because they will need to do that to generate enough material. But it goes directly from the plants to the meat. Now, right now, when we do our life cycle analysis, it takes about a 20th of the land to generate one of our burgers as it does to generate the cow equivalent. And if you think about the opportunity of that, what it says is that the more meat that's made using this more efficient approach, the more land is then freed up to be used for other purposes, whether that be restoration of biodiversity, ecosystems, carbon remediation, bioenergy crops. And there's a lot of different things you can do with that land once it's freed up from having to be used to produce cows. And so this is where I started off with the inefficiency of the animal as a way of making delicious food. If you can get a more efficient way to make delicious meat, you free up all the land and resources to achieve other things. And that enables you to come up with better systems better solutions throughout the rest of the food system.
So would you guys be doing that with the land that's on your farms that's freed up, or would you expect that to happen from the people who used to have factory farm animal facilities that would be essentially put out of business by moving to this model?
So we see ourselves as being a technology company learning how to make food more efficiently from the raw materials that farmers produce. So I don't see us being farmers. I see us being people buying products that are produced by farmers to turn into, meat and cheese, et cetera, et cetera. So I think my hope is that because we are using a more efficient system, there should be more margin to go around so the farmers can get more skin out of the game. If you look at the current industrial farming, certainly factory farming, the farmers really don't get a good deal out of this. I mean, you hear all those stories about the chicken farmers who are living on basically just not making it.
Oh yeah, if it wasn't government subsidized, none of them would make money. I mean, our world government, I have the numbers here. I mean, we spend $486 billion a year to subsidize an industrial food and farming model that the UN estimates contributes 43 to 57% of total man-made greenhouse gas emissions. So, I mean, clearly there's some issues there.
So, so if I go back to where we are, I mean, we know that animal food is an enormous part of the world GDP. There is no industry on earth, especially large-scale industry, that can survive with a 3% efficiency of conversion of raw materials into products. I mean, that's just crazy.
Right. And I mean,
99.9 or something crazy?
Yeah.
That's what we should be aspiring to, is that all the value created by the farmers turns into human products that humans can use or ecosystem services or everything else. So that fundamental inefficiency of the animal as a technology is what's driving almost all these problems. If we could come up with if we could just go from a 3% efficient process to a 50% efficient process, that fees up, that's 10x you need 10x less of it, all the inputs, whether that's water or land or whatever. You think how much we could do with that and how much value that unleashes for the farmers.
Yeah. And we've had regenerative polyculture farmers on the show before. We've had Joel Salatin on twice. We've had the folks from Epic Bar who are focusing on those practices. So if you guys listening haven't heard those episodes, go back and listen to those because we do talk about, from the farmer's standpoint, the solutions to increasing efficiency, both in terms of their output, but also in how that improves their profit margins, their ability to make a living and a livelihood, right, feeding the world the way we want to be fed with the food that we want in a way that supports the environment, not only today, but in the future. So,
right.
We'll shift gears a little bit here, Chris. You guys, the Impossible Foods message, I've read a lot of articles recently before this, so I don't remember exactly where this one was published, but the claim was that, that this impossible meat would change our diet within 10 years and that it is better for us than meat. With my background in nutrition, I'm curious, better for us how? Is that based on, sort of like that misconception that red meat is bad for us? When you say better for us, what do you guys mean?
So health claims are always difficult because we're an outbred population and it's very hard to prove anything. We haven't been on the market long enough to prove any health benefits. So we're not claiming anything like that. What we can say is that, the product contains no cholesterol. It contains no antibiotics. It contains, so it doesn't contain things like that. But if you think about it, we control all the ingredients. So we can knowingly design the product to make improvements in the nutritional value. So we've made a statement to ourselves, a promise to ourselves that we will never produce a product that isn't at least as nutritionally effective as the product we're designing it to replace. It's difficult to know exactly what that means, but that's the standard we hold ourselves to. So when we think about bringing new raw materials and new processes into our product, the standards that we hold ourselves to are, one, does it make the product more delicious? And then secondarily, does it make the product more nutritious? Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, does it make it more sustainable?
Right. But
if you think about it, when we talk about science, over time, we will keep tweaking this. Mm-hmm. So in 5 years as a company, we have basically gone from a postulate that it was possible to create something that looked like meat and behaved like meat, etc., to a product that is now on the market and is meeting consumer demand and consumers' needs for a delicious meat product. So there's no reason it won't be better 5 years from now. And better should be more nutritious, healthier, etc. Right. Exactly what that means will depend on what we discover, what science comes up, what we learn.
Right. I mean, for me, from my perspective, when I eat meat, I'm not just eating skeletal muscle meat. I'm eating organs. I'm eating bone broth. So I would, for me, for a meat substitute to be as nutritious or more nutritious, it would certainly have to contain, the CLA and the omega-3s that we see in grass-fed meats. I would want it to have the collagen that we get from, bone broth. I would want to make sure that, it doesn't contain if not GMOs, definitely not hormone disruptors that we know are in a lot of the industrial or conventionally farmed commodities like corn, soy, wheat.
And so that's where we get to make knowing choices. Most of the world's omega-3s are made in algae, which the fish then eat, which then end up in our diet through fish. We can buy those omega-3s or isolate them directly from the algae, and then put those in to be as high or as low as we want to be. Same is true with other nutrients and micronutrients. We can tune that to generate, what we perceive to be a better product. So, and the burger is really not the only I don't think of the burger as being the only meat. It's just where we started. In order to prove this technology and get to market and get people to start thinking, to have this discussion we're having now about the opportunity to make a more efficient food system, we wanted to start with a product. And practically, burgers are easier to make than steak. But we have to make steak. Steak is a key part of the food system. So we need to make that. And the same is true for bone broths, all these different things. There's no intrinsic reason we can't make them. We just haven't got to it yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, that being said, where do you see the Impossible Foods movement as a brand, as a company in 5 years, in 10 years? What would you like to see happening, not only with the company, but with your products?
So I think if we haven't made our burger, our Impossible meat, categorically tastier than the cow-derived version, I would consider that to be something I'd be unhappy with myself at that. Because after 5 years of the design, test, build, learn cycle that's common in all engineering, we should be making improvements. So we should have a fundamentally tastier product 5 years from now. The second piece I'd like to do is, I want to be able to make steak at that point. I want to be able to make, all the other products. So from a technology perspective, we'll be making a lot more different types of product. And then from a commercial perspective, obviously, every time somebody chooses to buy Impossible meat versus the cow-derived version, they're saving enormous amounts of environmental damage. And so the more we sell, the more environmental benefits we're causing. The more land we free up for other purposes, whatever. So from a commercial perspective, it's purely a matter of the more we sell, the more benefits we provide.
I mean, I know I sort of asked you this earlier with how the land use would happen. What are some of those other benefits? What would that look like? How would you guys enforce or make sure that that's happening, that it's more than just lip service?
Well, I don't think we can enforce anything, but by just the sheer fact of eating a more efficient meat, there will be downstream of processes. Every time you don't eat a cow, that means that you don't need as many cows in the landscape, so the environmental damage associated with that cow is reduced. So there's just straight up model improvements just by replacing the meat. In terms of the larger statement about us controlling the marketplace, I don't think that's really our place. Our job is to say there are better ways to farm. Here is an opportunity to rethink this system. Let us as a society, let's discuss how to make farming better, to work better for the farmers, to make better food, to make the environment more sustainable so that we can feed the 9-10 billion people we're going to have in a way that this planet that we can all live with, because we'll still retain the resources of the natural ecosystems. That's a longer term thing. I don't think that's something we can do as a single company, but what we can do is provide that leadership about and this discussion about of how do we make a better, more efficient way to feed people that is less environmentally damaging.
And I just want to reiterate, I mean, when you say compared to cows, and, when we're discussing the inefficiency and, the resource consumption to produce a burger and a cow, I mean, that's the factory farming, the conventional model. I mean, we know, like I said earlier, in what we've cited in previous podcasts, that the efficiency is much greater and the resource that spectrum is shortened and improved with regenerative polyculture farming.
That helps to some extent, but but a cow still, as its primary mechanism turning biomass into meat, its digestive system is that of an anaerobic digester, and that generates enormous amounts of methane. So there is no way to have a cow without the methane. You can do some benefits to that by changing the food inputs, but fundamentally it will still produce a bunch of methane. And that fundamentally is a problem for the greenhouse gases. The other part of that is, in order for the cow, the cow, by definition, its role as an organism is to generate more cows, not to generate meat. If we don't have to go through that step of making a cow, there is all the efficiencies associated with doing that. If we take our biomass directly from this polycultural farming, from the plants generated by those farms, and turn those directly into meat in a more efficient way, that is an even better solution than using the cow.
So aside from, impossible meats, what are 2 or 3 other things that our listeners could implement in their daily lives that would help us move in the direction of being able to feed more people and reduce our impact on the environment?
I think that all the mandates are pretty clear that a more plant-derived diet will be more sustainable and easier on the planet. That meat should be something that's eaten as a... I personally like Hal McGee's statement for how you should think about food is to eat everything in moderation, but not a lot of meat. That's probably the single most best way to think about food. And then obviously the more you make locally farmed material, because even locally farmed materials may not make sense because those farms can be less efficient than the industrialized farms in the Midwest, where you can generate enormous amounts of food very efficiently. So it's a very complex issue, but I think the individual should really focus on eating the best they can eat for their health and not eat. If they just don't eat a lot of meat, they will be doing a lot of good for the environment. And then obviously not wasting food. I mean, it's 20% of food or something that the Americans buy gets wasted.
I don't know the exact number across the country, but it's huge. I know that just in the state of California, it's 6 million tons annually.
Right.
And the number was, I think that was enough to fill the Staples Center 34 or 35 times over.
Right.
And that makes food the largest single source of waste just in the state of California. And we use California as an example. It's the largest state in the U.S., but and that's ridiculous. I mean, that's if we can find a way to not throw that food away, whether it's at the home, at the restaurant level, at the grocery store level, there are so many people in the U.S. that don't have food security, not to mention, in places like Africa or Asia or other undeveloped places. So when we talk about, distribution and getting food to people that don't have it, we're throwing away way more food than most people realize. So I would definitely agree with that.
So, I mean, the only thing that is guaranteed to win, because any form of production process, there is some environmental degradation associated with any production process because of the nature of entropy. So the only thing that is guaranteed to be an absolute win for the environment is not to waste things, whether that's insulation in your heat, in your housing, whether that's not buying more food and ordering more food than you can eat, recycling, all these things make a difference and they all add up. So waste is the single simplest thing to eradicate that is a guaranteed win for any life cycle analysis.
Yeah, Chris, before we let you go, 2 questions then. Number one, where can our listeners get more of you or learn more about Impossible Foods?
So obviously there's a website, which is impossiblefoods.com. We do have a Twitter feed and a Facebook page, etc. Right now, we're only available in 36 restaurants, which are in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles area, New York, and Texas. In a series of chains there, and you can find which. And so those are going well, but we anticipate rolling out to the rest of the country over the next few months. And really, I think what I'd like the listeners to do is start having this discussion about how we should think about food and how we can efficiently make food. And Impossible Foods is part of the solution, but it's certainly not the entire solution. But it's that discussion that's going to drive to a better food ecosystem. And hopefully, as the Impossible Burger becomes more available to people, people will taste it, hopefully like it, and then they'll choose to buy it because it's a more delicious food product. We're not asking anybody to make any sacrifices or buy the material because it is more sustainable. We want people to buy it because it's delicious. And then by doing so, they will make environmental benefits, but that's not why they should buy it. We should buy it because they like it.
Okay. And the final question, the one that every guest has to answer, we want to know your top 3 tips to live optimal.
Ooh, the top 3 tips to live optimally. Be happy. We choose how we respond to external events, and if we choose to respond to those in a positive way, it enables us to be happy, and being happy leads to pretty much everything else flows from that. Being nice to people. If we're all nicer to each other, again, that would make everybody's life better. And I think being nice to people also means being nice to the environment, and that means not wasting things. Be mindful about how you treat them, how you make your choices. Make choices that make the world a better place. And if we do all those 3 things, I think it would be much better.
I love it. The last one's great. Yeah, that last one's great. I love it. Chris, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing, what you guys do with us here on the OPP. For you guys listening, go to naturalstacks.com. You'll be able to see the blog post for this, along with links and resources. We'll have the links to the Impossible Foods website and several of the articles where they've been featured on other sites and publications. And make sure you guys go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. Let us know how much you like the show. If we read your review on the air, we will hook you up with free Natural Stacks products. And finally, share the OPP with your friends and family, the people you know who will benefit from and enjoy the things that we're talking about here. That's how we spread the message and get this out to more people. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next show. Chris, thank you so much.
My pleasure.